Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining this evening. This is a Keystone Trails Association supported webinar. My name is Haley, and I am communications for the Keystone Trails Association. Tonight, we are really excited to welcome Matthew March of the Cumberland County Historical Society. Matthew is the education director and will be presenting tonight on the Underground Railroad of South Central Pennsylvania. Um, the easiest way for me to keep you guys informed about what KTA does and upcoming events that we have is to share with you our newsletter sign up. So I'm going to go ahead and drop the link for you to be able to sign up for that in the chat. But with that, I'm going to stop talking and turn things over to Matthew. So Matthew, thank you so much. And the webinar is all yours. While Matthew is presenting, if anyone has any questions and at the time you want to go ahead and put them into the chat or hold on to them until the end of his presentation, we will have a brief Q&A at the end. But thank you, Matthew.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. And thank you everyone for joining us. So I only have several slides because I figured those will be a little better than just kind of staring at me. But when we are talking about, the Underground Railroad, uh, we really have to kind of start at the same place. And so one of the things I always like to mention is that, Pennsylvania, like every colony, was a slaveholding colony. That was a slaveholding state. And when we're looking at the Underground Railroad of South Central Pennsylvania, that area was the last area in Pennsylvania that enslaved people. Uh, Cumberland County, where I work and am based out of, there were slaves all the way on the tax records all the way until 1845. Now, before that, with William Penn, who really founds this colony on the premise of personal liberties, was an enslaver. And it's not until the Quakers have an enlightenment when they finally start to do something about the issue of slavery in Pennsylvania. And that starts with what is called the Gradual Act for Abolition in 1780. Now, this was really the first legislation to try to deal with the issue of slavery, but it doesn't really go far enough. And in the legislation, it really sets up a system where slavery could have endured forever in Pennsylvania, with people that were enslavers having to register any people they had enslaved. By November 1780, anyone that was under 28 years old was to be enslaved until they were 28. Any children they had while they were enslaved were going to be enslaved as well until they were 28, and so on and so on. And so here in Cumberland County, that sets up a dynamic where you have things like slaves for life and what would be called term slaves. And these are just some advertisements I pulled out of local newspapers. And so this one even just simply advertises a slave for life. And here would be an example of enslavement for a term until she turns 28 years old.
Never heard that before.
With people, of course, uh, this also sets up the situation where if people were trying to seek their freedom, it was a big industry or a big business trying to catch freedom seekers. And so this is an advertisement again from Cumberland County Historical Society's archives for a $60 reward for one 16-year-old girl. And $60 in 1832 was a lot of money. And so you have this kind of dynamic situation in South Central Pennsylvania where, people seeking their freedom are coming into an area where a lot of the community still supported slavery. And when we're looking back with our 2025 minds, we also have to realize that there are a lot of uh, not deceptions, but kind of some false ideas about the Underground Railroad and people seeking their freedom. And this is one that I remember when I was growing up, and that is, the idea that, freedom seekers are going to feel around a tree for moss, because of course, moss is going to only grow on the north side of trees. And I did find this image just to show you that, of course, moss can grow anywhere where the conditions will allow it. We also have, singing the song of following the drinking gourd. And of course, that is a song referencing the Big Dipper. And this is an accurate way for freedom seekers to go north, but it's very specific. It has to be nighttime, and it also has to be a pretty clear night. Uh, Also, we want to kind of look back and use our modern minds and say, well, I wouldn't have been like that. And so in local newspapers, I see houses advertised for sale that are being advertised as, houses on the Underground Railroad. And when we look into the historical record, they were actually the homes of enslavers. Um, and so, we kind of have to get through a lot of these, kind of fallacies about the Underground Railroad. Now, for my take on the Underground Railroad in South Central Pennsylvania, you know, I find that, the easiest way to get north for your freedom would be to get in the Great Appalachian Valley. And of course, you can see it here in this image. And as long as there have been human beings in this area, they have used the Great Valley as a natural transportation kind of portal or a hub. And so the people seeking their freedom coming into our area aren't coming from, Alabama or the Deep South. Usually they're going to be coming from northwestern Maryland and northeastern Virginia, roughly 125 miles or less. And of course, if you simply get into what is, in Virginia, the Shenandoah Valley, and you're heading north and don't walk over a mountain, it will lead you to the north. Now, this is an image of Cumberland County in its current geographic boundaries. Now, these are some of the known stops. Now, there are many other oral traditions, and I believe a lot of them. However, these are documented sites. And I've tried to shade in the bottom to represent what is today Michaud State Forest. And then just a little bit above that would be, of course, the Cumberland Valley. Now, how this kind of relates to the Underground Railroad from this image is that Cumberland County, our Underground Railroad route really becomes known as the Iron Route. This was an iron producing region. And so there were iron furnaces in Shippensburg, Pine Grove, Huntsdale, Mount Holly Springs, Boiling Springs, and even a couple others. Of course, I'm going to show another image with Caledonia further to the south. And these are conveniently spaced about a day's walk apart, especially if you are fearful of being caught. And so using these iron furnaces as stops on the Underground Railroad often led people to believe that it was the work of, these iron masters who were, all these benevolent people. However, they were enslavers themselves. And I would argue, that the reason that the Underground Railroad goes to these sites is because not of the iron furnace itself, but because all of these furnaces would have had black communities right beside them. The iron furnaces I know in Boiling Springs and Pine Grove, they both had labor from enslaved people. And so right beside these furnaces, there were these small communities where there would be people who were willing to break federal law, knew what you had been through, and willing to maybe give you food, water, information, which were really, your three big important needs if you are trying to get your freedom. Now, the most famous of our Underground Railroad conductors is this man, and his name is Daniel Kaufman. He was the founder of the village of Boiling Springs. This is up until just recently, this was the only known picture we knew that existed of him, and this was from his obituary when he was a very old man. But in his kind of he gave an interview before he died. And in that, he states that, to the best of his knowledge, he had helped over 70 freedom seekers get their freedom. And none of them were ever caught. Now, the only reason we know about Daniel Kaufman is because he gets caught. And how he gets caught is a rather unique story in that there are 13 enslaved people on a farm in Maryland, and their enslaver dies. And as a way to uh, ensure that family debts are paid and that her children are going to get an inheritance, uh, the widow is going to sell everyone. And even the man in charge of the day-to-day operations of the farm goes to these enslaved people and basically tells them that, if you have ever thought about running away, now's the time. Because once she gets back from doing her business, everybody is going to get sold. And to quote him, he says, "This will be like a horse auction. The most money wins." And so these 13 people, which is two complete families, they decide to take a huge risk and uh, try to get their freedom all together. Now, if you look at the data, it is overwhelming that with freedom seekers, it is almost always a single person in, their early 20s. And so for 13 people at one time is just outstanding. And yet they make this very important decision and they start heading up the Shenandoah Valley. Now, when you would cross the Maryland and Pennsylvania border, there were conductors on the Underground Railroad that were to assist you. Rouserville was a very well-known stop. And then from there, it gets very situational. I had mentioned earlier that what they would have called slave catching, that was really big money. And so there quite literally were gangs of men who would wait near the border, towns like Chambersburg and Shippensburg, and they would wait for passersby to match descriptions and try to catch them to get rewards. And so, through this network of Underground Railroad, of the Underground Railroad, you're going to pass that information along and say, hey, there are some people in Shippensburg. So we can't go right up the valley to a town like Carlisle, which had a large black population and stops on the Underground Railroad. But instead, we're going to have to go through the forest. And today we know that as Michaud State Forest. And so they would be led to the Caledonia Iron Furnace, of course, owned by abolitionist Thaddeus Stevens, and his superintendent at his ironworks a man named Mr. Black. He would then lead them through the forests towards Pine Grove Iron Furnace. And then from there, you would have to, of course, reassess. You could come down out of the mountains and go to the foot of the mountain where there were Black communities at places like Mount Holly Springs and a place called Irish Town. Uh, Eventually, you could be led to Boiling Springs, where Daniel Kaufman was. And in this case, these 13 people are led right at the foot of the mountain by an African American man named George Cole. And he is taking them towards Boiling Springs and uh, giving them the information that they want to get to the iron furnace because in Boiling Springs case, the little Black community is literally only 200 feet away from the iron furnace. And this is where they were to try to get to. But they were given the information that, if anything happens and you can't get to that iron furnace, you need to look for a guy named Daniel Kaufman. And so when they are close to Boiling Springs, they make the unfortunate kind of realization that they can't get to the furnace. For some reason, there was some sort of commotion. And so they have to figure out where Daniel Kaufman lives. And they ask, passerby, hey, do you know where Daniel Kaufman lives? And they get pointed right to his house. Now, Daniel Kaufman had owned hundreds and hundreds of acres. And traditionally, he had hidden freedom seekers way back on the edge of his farm by Yellow Breeches Creek, where he had a little stone shack built. So, of course, they're going to be able to have water, shelter, and he would bring them food. And there would be no reason for anybody to go back into this kind of very heavily wooded area. But in this case, they show up on his front door and he is astounded. And his immediate thought is really to just shut the door on them. But he sees what they, ask what they need. And he decides to put them in his barn, which was, directly beside his house. And of course, word spreads through small towns like wildfire. And pretty quickly, everyone knows this. And two local villagers go to Daniel Kaufman's house and they knock on his door and basically are inquiring, hey, do you have runaway slaves here? And he says, no, of course I don't. Well, they persist and they say, well, Daniel, we know where they're here because they asked where you live. He says, well, yeah, they're here. Well, Daniel, can we see them? He says, no, of course you can't see them. Well, Daniel, we promise we won't tell anyone. And that was good enough for Daniel. And he lets these two men into his barn. And they see these two families sleeping in his animal stables. And the two fathers wake up. And the one thing that these two fathers, they're talking to these two village guys. And they, the one thing the fathers say is that if anybody tries to take them back down south into slavery, they're willing to fight to the death to get their family's freedom. And this satisfies the villagers' curiosity and they leave. Later that night, Daniel Kaufman puts them in his wagon, takes them to a location we do not know because the Underground Railroad was a secret organization. And a lot of the time you're not writing down, hey, today I broke federal law. So we do not know where he took them, but they disappear to history. They get their freedom. However, their former owner, their enslaver, she returns to her farm and everybody is gone. And so she hires some trackers and they track them right up the Cumberland Valley and right to Daniel Kaufman's front door. And because he was the only person where they were seen on his property being given aid, he gets sued and is taken to court. And he is taken to what we today call the old courthouse. This is October 1846. I'm sorry, 1847. And this was the brand new courthouse in 1846. And here in a southern leaning, pro-slavery county, Daniel Kaufman's found guilty. Now, his lawyer makes a really good argument on appeal and basically says, well, my client might be guilty. But if he is, this isn't a county problem. This is a federal issue, and you need to take him to federal court. And it takes 2 years for this court case to work its way through the federal system all the way to the Federal Circuit Court in Philadelphia, where in 1849 he is ultimately found guilty for helping those 13 people get their freedom. Now, in 1849, this is not a you're going to go to jail crime. The punishment is a monetary fine so large that they were trying to ensure you could never help anyone again. And in 1849, Daniel Kaufman gets fined almost $5,000. And of course, the big issue with this is that, if everybody knows you're a member of a secret organization, it's no longer a secret. And so he can no longer provide help for freedom seekers. Now, fortunately, his brother-in-law, a man named Stephen Weekly, who lived about 8 miles west of Boiling Springs, he kind of takes over those needs. What's even more fortunate is that, of course, the Underground Railroad will cease to be needed in just, over a decade from that final verdict. Now, this is our, most 100% documented, instance of the Underground Railroad because he is caught. And we even know what was said because of the court transcripts from the federal trial. Now, there are plenty of other stories that I believe, and one I really kind of like is that there was an African-American barber in the town of Carlisle, which is the county seat of Cumberland County, and that is where this courthouse is located. But John Peck, he was a barber. And I just think that is, kind of the perfect cover for Underground Railroad activity. Because, just up until a couple years ago, my barber only took cash. And, barbers had real money, which would have been rare. Also, my barber to this day knows everybody's business in town. And those two big things of information and money, I think would just make a perfect cover. And so, I know I'm running out of time, and this is one of those things I really could talk to you all night. But I do want to open it up to some questions, if anybody has some, or even some comments. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. There we go.
And again, if anyone has any questions, you can type them out in the chat and I can read those aloud. Or if you want to unmute yourself, you can go ahead and ask. But thank you so much, Matthew. That was very insightful.
I even take comments.